In Africa, we've had our fair share of political parties that have existed for decades. It is interesting to note that they have a lot in common. Most of them started along ethnic lines during colonial rule, apparently agitating for land reform and self-governance. When the wind of change swept across the African continent, these parties went on to form government. Many were hopeful that this was going to be a new dawn of freedom, but many of these parties went on to become autocratic regimes, with many African countries becoming one-party states under their rule. The parties became indistinguishable from the governments they formed, even taking the semblance of their old colonial masters. Any resistance was crushed ruthlessly by these autocratic regimes across the continent. Now, this resulted in subsequent waves of democracy, with some of the ruling independence parties being defeated. Some of these parties, however, have survived and they still rule today. In other cases, like here in Kenya, KANU merely rebranded into other political parties. In the Kenyan case, for instance, the KANU rebrand is characterized by political parties being put together hastily for convenience, devoid of any ideology that is relevant to the sovereign, that is, the people of Kenya. These parties are littered with old KANU boys, and once they get power, the parties quickly disintegrate and new ones are invented to form government in the next electoral cycle. Now, before I divert my attention to Kenyan politics, in this video, we will be looking at some of the surviving independence parties in Africa and the problems that they pose to the great people of this continent. We will highlight 5 surviving independence parties in Africa. That is the ANC in South Africa, Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, MPLA in Angola, and FRELIMO in Mozambique. These parties, rooted in liberation struggles, continue to dominate their political landscapes in 2025, despite waves of democratization and public discontent. The mentioned parties emerged during colonial rule, channeling anti-colonial sentiments into organized resistance. Their initial agitations focused on independence and redistributing land, often amid ethnic tensions. The ANC, founded in 1912, originated as a response to racial segregation and land dispossession under British and later Afrikaner rule. It agitated for non-racial democracy, civil rights, and economic equity. Evolving into an armed struggle through its military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, after the 1960 Sharperville massacre. By 1994, it led South Africa's transition from apartheid. The CCM traces its roots to the Tanganyika African National Union, established in 1954 under Julius Kabarage Nyerere. It agitated for independence from British rule, emphasizing African socialism or Ujamaa. It also championed land reform and self-reliance, uniting diverse ethnic groups against colonial exploitation. After merging with Zanzibar's Afro-Shirazi Party in 1977, CCM became Tanzania's dominant force. ZANU-PF, formed in 1963, fought against Rhodesian white minority rule. Led by Robert Mugabe, it agitated for majority rule, land redistribution from white farmers to African Zimbabweans, and economic sovereignty, culminating in independence in 1980. The MPLA, founded in 1956, emerged from Angolan nationalist groups opposing Portuguese colonialism. It agitated for independence, social justice, and resource control, drawing from communist influences and leading a guerrilla war that ended with Angola's 1975 independence. FRELIMO, established in 1962, united Mozambican exile groups against Portuguese rule. It agitated for national liberation, agrarian reform, and gender equality, waging a decade-long war that secured independence in 1975. Now, critically, these origins were noble, but often ethnically skewed, setting the stage for post-independence exclusion. Welcome to Politicos 254. Here we talk about law, power, and politics. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Now let's get back to business. Post-independence, these parties swiftly consolidated power, establishing one-party states justified as necessary for unity amid ethnic divisions and external threats. The uniformity across Africa in the late 20th century, from the 1960s to the 1990s, was striking. Over 30 African countries adopted single-party systems. South Africa under the ANC avoided formal one-party rule post-1994, but exhibited dominance through patronage. Leaders like Mugabe, Dos Santos, Moi, Jomo Kenyatta, among others, blurred party state lines, using repression to crush opposition. Dissent was labeled as tribalistic, echoing colonial divide and rule tactics. In Tanzania, CCM's Ujamaa villages forcibly relocated millions, stifling rural autonomy. ZANU-PF's Gukuharundi massacres in the 1980s killed thousands of Ndebele opponents. Now, this uniformity across the continent was too apparent for it to be a mere coincidence. So, was this by design of global influences? The answer is yes, partially. You see, during the Cold War, superpowers exacerbated authoritarianism to keep Africa in check. The USSR backed Marxist one-party states like the MPLA and Frelimo with arms and ideology, promoting democratic centralism as unity. The US, on the other hand, tolerated or supported anti-communist autocrats, prioritizing resource access over democracy. This proxy warfare prolonged civil wars, entrenching ruling parties as liberators, while weakening the people and their institutions. Post-Cold War, structural adjustment programs from the West further empowered incumbents through economic leverage, perpetuating neocolonial rule over Africa's resources. Nigeria exemplifies how independence parties interacted destructively with military regimes. Nigeria's independence parties, that is, the Northern People's Congress, the National Council of Nigeria, and the Cameroons and the Action Group, formed a fragile coalition in 1960, but collapsed amid ethnic tensions leading to the 1966 military coup. Military regimes alternated with brief civilian interludes, co-opting or suppressing the people. Now, this dynamic fragmented independence legacies. Now, none of these parties survives as a ruling entity today, but modern parties like the APC blend military and civilian elites. Critically, military interventions in Nigeria mirrored Africa's broader pattern. These interventions would reset party dominance by reinforcing autocracy, as seen in Zimbabwe, where ZANU-PF used military alliances to quash opposition. In Angola and Mozambique, the MPLA and Frelimo integrated military wings into state forces, blurring lines and enabling despotism. Fast forward to 2025, these parties pose ongoing threats through corruption, repression, and economic mismanagement, eroding public trust. The ANC, after losing its majority in 2024, governs via coalition but faces accusations of corruption, unemployment, and inequality. Ethnopopulism and service delivery failures fuel xenophobia and protests down south. CCM's 2025 election victory under Samia Suluhu Hassan is marred by voter suppression, killings and abductions, deepening societal divisions and economic inequality. ZANU-PF under Emerson Mnangagwa perpetuates repression with arbitrary arrests, hyperinflation and youth marginalization. The MPLA in Angola stifles dissent through media control and patronage, exacerbating poverty despite oil wealth, with protests over fuel prices highlighting inequality. Frelimo as well faces nationwide unrest after 2024's rigged elections, with killings and fraud eroding legitimacy amid insurgency in Cabo Delgado. Now, these issues, corruption, repression, and economic stagnation, perpetuate cycles of poverty and instability, mirroring colonial exploitation. For my parting shot, Africans should view these political parties not as eternal liberators, but as entities accountable to the people. We must sit down and critically analyze whether one-party states were inevitable or a mere betrayal of independence ideals. Global influences in the plight of our continent call for African solidarity against neo-colonialism. You and I can empower the new generation through education and digital activism to challenge and to kill the false narratives that are indoctrinated in our education systems.